Show.
Welcome to episode 105 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on YouTube as well. As of Sunday, May 21st, 2023, there is some massive news in Leaf land. Seismic events have happened in Leafs land. Kyle Dubas is out as general manager. Brendan Shanahan did not renew his contract. Who knows what's going to happen next? It looks like Sheldon Keefe's days are numbered. The core four, it seems like their days together are also numbered. Who the hell is going to be the next Leafs GM? We're going to talk about that on this podcast. There's a lot to go over here. I mean, arguably the most dramatic week in the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs franchise just went down, and we are going to give you our thoughts and opinions on everything that happened. We're going to go over the Dubas and Shanahan situation. We're going to talk about Dubas' tenure as GM, and then, as I mentioned, we will get into who we believe could be the next GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But before we get into all that, it is time to officially welcome in my partner in crime, Mr. Michael Lepore. How you doing today, man?
How's it going, Anthony Bruno? How am I doing? Well, it took us 105 episodes, but we finally have a firing, a coach, a GM. We have a GM. Maybe a coach is coming. It stinks, whatever side of the coin you're on, whether you thought it was a good decision or a bad decision. It just sucks to be here. We all hope we were playing, or we all wish we were playing in the Eastern Conference Final and not dealing with turmoil. We'll call it turmoil right now. So a little anxious to get specific to the question of how I'm doing. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be the craziest summer in a long time for the Toronto Maple Leafs, because there are a lot of questions to answer and a lot of work to be done.
Let's get right into this.
Yeah, let's do it.
The press conference that Brendan Shanahan had was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen in my life. I was watching it live, and I could not believe the detail that he was going into, breaking down the exact steps in the process, going back to last summer, and how him and Dubas were essentially trying to negotiate a new contract. Like, I could not believe the detail that was being displayed to the public. It was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that, especially with the Leafs. Honestly, even really in North American sports, it was crazy to see. And as candid as Dubas was in his press conference days before that, it's like Shanahan took it to another level. So let's just break this down quickly, and then we'll go into our thoughts and give you our opinions on the whole situation. Did the Leafs screw up? Did Dubas overplay his hand? But anyway, so going back to last season, or going back to training camp, I should say, Shanahan came to Dubas and said, listen, we're not going to renew your contract right now. We're going to have you play out the final year of your deal, and then we're going to evaluate you at the end of the contract and figure it out from there. But it is my hope that this is all going to work out and you'll be back as Leafs GM. And Dubas even talked about this, Lepore, in his press conference before the start of the season. He said, listen, I'm going to get ahead of this. My contract hasn't been renewed, but I'm comfortable with this. I'm going to be judged at the end, and then hopefully I'll be back, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so the Leafs end up beating Tampa in the first round. Before I jump that far ahead, after the trade deadline, Shanahan approached Dubas and said, listen, Kyle, I've seen enough. I want to work something out, and I want you to be back as GM of the Maple Leafs. And Dubas seemed on board with that. Everything was fine. Fast forward to the playoffs. The Leafs finally win a playoff series for the first time in 19 years. Then they get to the second round, and they get knocked out. But at that point, Shanahan was still comfortable moving forward, negotiating a contract with Dubas. He's like, listen, I want to get ahead of this. Even though we're in the middle of the playoffs now, I want to work on something. And Dubas again seemed to be on board. Then the Leafs get knocked out, and Shanahan goes to Dubas and says, listen, I'm not going to speak on locker cleanout day, and I would suggest that you don't speak either until we work out a contract. But Dubas said, actually, I want to speak on locker cleanout day because I want to be there with the players, and I want to I want to discuss some things as well. And Shanahan respected that. And then apparently that's where everything changed because Dubas has his press conference and he was very candid. As I mentioned, he said that this job has taken a huge toll on his family and he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue doing this job and being the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And according to Shanahan, that's when everything shifted. That seed of doubt was put into Shanahan. And then from there, it was a rocky relationship. But even after that, they were still working out a deal. Like everything was fine. So I'll add in a couple things here. And Lepore, we'll get to, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure, everybody is.
Elliot Friedman on Hockey Night in Canada last night reported that as on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, Kyle Dubas held a meeting with coaches and executives with all the important people in the Leafs organization, held a meeting with everybody trying to figure out how they could move forward as a team and what they need to do better next season. So that was literally like 2 days before he was fired, which is crazy. Okay, so anyway, they were communicating, Shanahan and Dubas, and then it got to the point where Dubas essentially wanted to rework the contract. So he told Shanahan, listen, like, I want to be back as GM, but here's my new demands. And Elliot Friedman also reported on Hockey Night in Canada that a part of those demands were that he wanted a little bit more autonomy. He wanted to streamline the decision-making process with the Leafs, where before it was going from Dubas to Shanahan to the board with Rogers and Bell, and then back down when they had to make like big decisions, whether it's trades or free agent signings. Anyway, everything shifted in Shanahan's mind. So even though Dubas at the 11th hour said, I want to be back, here's my new contract demands, who knows how much more money he asked for, Shanahan slept on it. He woke up Friday morning and realized, listen, I do not want to move forward with this guy as my GM. I want to change this. This is not going to work. And on Friday, he let go Kyle Dubas, fired him, and now here we are. So Lepore, like, what the hell happened, man? What are your thoughts on how this all went down?
It's fascinating as all hell. I was saying to someone the other day, and I think we can all admit this, when we encounter these types of situations and we all make judgment, it's very difficult. And I say we always have to be careful because there's always going to be stuff we don't know. I'm sure if Kyle Dubas went on stage today and told his story, it wouldn't exactly be how Brendan Shanahan said it went. And that's not to say Dubas is right and Shanahan is wrong, but hearing the other perspective is always very important. And what makes this one even tougher is that typically, I know how I handle it anyway, when there's a conflict or an issue between two different sides, whether it's people or, companies, whatever, I give the benefit of the doubt to the person who, in my experience, has shown greater intelligence and a more calculated process. Why this is so hard is because Brendan Shanahan and Kyle Dubas are both very smart, very calculated people. So there's a lot of confusion in my mind. Like, I'm playing ping pong a little bit, going back and forth, trying to wrap my head around it. How I see it is this way, and this could be a Leafs fanboy talking. I love this team, okay? I've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in my life at the Toronto Maple Leafs, and a lot of people have, okay? So when it comes to a coach, a player, any staff member, a general manager, or a president, if they are asked the question, do you want to be a part of the Toronto Maple Leafs? It has to be 100% slam dunk yes, without a breath. And people can call it ego. I'm going to say it. We are the palace of the NHL. We are the biggest. We have the most fans. We make the most money. We have the most assets. Our players get the biggest endorsements. These are objective things. As much as people want to hate it on the Leafs or not, these are facts. Okay. So I think there's a little bit, and you could use entitlement as a good thing or a bad thing with this, but I kind of have that entitlement saying, no, anyone involved in my organization is 100% in, 100%, because there's benefits. And again, if we're being honest, and I think every fan base would admit this, there would be no greater reward than winning in Toronto compared to other cities. So I would like to think and hope that Shanahan feels this way. And I think based on what we know about the type of player he was, the type of person he is, I think it's fair to assume he would feel that way. So when Kyle Dubas gets up there and brings up the whole family thing, and I have a wife, I have a child, so I'm sensitive to what he's saying. Okay. He kind of made me think when he was saying it, like, man, if I was general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, how much of my wife would I see? How much of my daughter would I see? And that sucks. So I'm totally sensitive, and he's entitled to feel that way, but to express it to the public. And it came out that they had those discussions previously about family and the toll. But I mean, verbiage is important. So who knows how much Dubas expressed? I mean, it's obvious. Yeah, it's hard on the family. If Dubas just expressed, yeah, it's hard on my family, Brendan would be like, yeah, me too, whatever.
But he went into detail about it.
Yeah, Kyle went deep into it. And to make it almost seem as if it's his decision to be back and he wasn't sure, that's where it teetered for Shanny. At least I think anyway, because it would teeter for me. If I'm the president, I want my GM to be 100% committed, because what it's saying too is, if you take the job, am I confident that you're not going to kind of change your mind in 3 months and be like, oh, this is fucking up my family? And again, there's nothing wrong with having that opinion, but if you're the boss, you can't have that. You can't have that. You need the person who's the workaholic psychopath that all they care about is the Toronto Maple Leafs. And maybe that's a little twisted, but that's the reality. This is a competitive environment. Okay. So on to the next phase. That little bit of doubt is put in Shanahan's head. And then he comes back with a rebuttal in the contract. So wait a second. You're not sure about this, but you're going to play chicken with the Toronto Maple Leafs to see who blinks first? I am sorry. I said to Bruno before we started recording, it seems like everyone on social media is either like Team Shanahan or Team Dubas on this one, but it's tough to argue against the decisions Shanahan made based on his responsibilities to this organization. He cannot move forward with the GM who's not pot committed. He can't. It is too important. It is too important for the organization. And I'll say it again, we're different. And by that, I mean, you could spin it as a bad thing, where with everything that comes with being a president or general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the commitment level from a mental side has to be 100 out of 100, not 99.
Yeah, to survive in this market and to excel in this market, if you are not fully committed, you're drawing dead.
Yeah, and honestly, and this is where I'll say it, and this might ruffle some feathers. People were saying about, like, treatment of his family. Okay. And, I guess things that are said, or, obviously at him, you're the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. When I hear that about an athlete or someone else, oh, like my family, how my family was treated, it's a bunch of idiots on the internet. Who cares? That's part of it. If you're sensitive to that and you can't take that, you're in the wrong position. And that's not me saying these people deserve to do that or they're entitled to do that. No, it's bullshit. It's horrible. And no one family should be treated any way. But regardless, whatever our opinion is on the matter, it happens. So if I take a job in management with the Toronto Maple Leafs, I gotta assume people are going to be throwing shots at my wife on Twitter. And my reaction would be, who gives a shit? The person's hiding behind a keyboard. So it's loaded, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure we're going to have kind of circle discussions as the summer goes on. And as more gets piled onto this by in the way of what we find out and the progression of the Leafs going forward, there's going to be a lot to talk about and a lot to debate about.
It's time for a quick break because the Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and so are your friends at MANSCAPED. They're making sure you're at your best when it matters most. Use the Lawnmower 4.0 to chop through your bush, just like the best players in the world chop through defenders. You can have the smoothest balls in the league by going to manscaped.com and using our exclusive promo code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping. Lepore Manscaped never misses with their amazing products.
They don't. As everyone knows, Anthony Bruno and I cheer for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Toronto Maple Leafs suck. So thank goodness we have our favorite products from Manscaped to cheer us up during times like this. As soon as this video is over, head over to manscaped.com. There's a whole whack of products throw some in your cart, use the promo code GFP20 for 20% off and free shipping.
Gentlemen, you got to look your best, you got to feel your best, and you got to perform your best. And the way that you do that is with these amazing products from Manscaped. The Lawnmower 4.0, the Weed Whacker 2.0, the Boxers. I mean, go down the list. They have so many amazing products, and I promise you will not be disappointed because they are top-notch across the board. So get 20% off and free shipping using our exclusive promo code GFP20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping using the promo code GFP20 at manscaped.com. As much as I like Kyle Dubas and as much as I wanted him to return as GM, and as much as I believe that even at this very moment that he's probably the most qualified person to do the job based on everything that he's built since the second he walked into this organization and was appointed general manager in 2018, as much as I believe he is the guy, I agree that how could you blame Brendan Shanahan for doing what he did? Like, I don't think Shanahan is a villain in this either. Lepore, I think you laid it out perfectly, and I think it's pretty cut and dry, because the way that I looked at it was that as soon as that seed of doubt went into Shanahan's head, everything changed. And if you are not able to see that, I don't know what to tell you. Because, Lepore, you laid it out, man. If you were going to be the GM and run this organization, all right, this is not the Florida Panthers or the St. Louis Blues or go down the list. This is the Toronto Maple Leafs. And again, maybe that's us as Leaf fans and, you know, we're putting ourselves on a pedestal. And
no, it's
we're
not
the greatest
Bruno.
Organization in the history of sports.
Bruno, it's not. And I'll tell you why. Remember when Joe Biden made fun of us in Parliament? Everyone, the Leafs. Yeah, well, he could have picked on anyone, and he picked on us. Why? Because it's attention. That's why. So anyone, go ahead.
They're the pinnacle. They're the pinnacle of the NHL, man. Like they're the New York Yankees of the NHL. It's as simple as that. And again, like the Leafs haters can come at us, say whatever you want, but the facts are the facts.
Yeah, I'm talking about money here,
especially from a financial perspective, fan perspective. Go down the list. So if you are not all in, that's tough, man. Like, and again, Shanahan, like he can sympathize with that. Like Shanahan's been in the NHL his whole life. His family's dealt with the same thing. He said it in his press conference. Like, those are the things that come along with the job. Like, it's difficult on all our families. But then Shanahan also said it is a privilege to be able to work in the National Hockey League. Whether you're a player, a coach, a scout, an executive, it is a privilege to work in this league. Think about Kyle Dubas, man. This guy was handed the keys to the castle in his early 30s, becoming GM of the Leafs. He joined the organization in his late 20s. He's only 37 years old. Like, this guy had it all. And it's just such a shame that it ended this way. Yeah. And again, like, I don't really blame Shanahan, because as soon as that seed of doubt came into his head, he's thinking, wait a second. This guy, not only did he tell me privately that he's having some questions about whether he wants to continue, then he told the public the exact same thing. And sure, It's like, okay, we do sympathize with you, Kyle Dubas. Like, even Lepore, us, right? Like, we're a small podcast. I'm a content creator. I do my own content. Like, we get horrible messages all the time.
Sure.
Whether it's in the comments section, direct messages, people are sending us like some wild shit. Like I can't even tell you some of the stuff that I get on social media. All right. But it's like you said, Lepore, it's trolls on the internet. It's people who are full of hate, who are miserable. It's more a reflection of those people than it is the people who are receiving these messages. That's the way I look at it, at least. 100%. Right. So it's like, listen, I get it. Like Kyle Dubas and his family, they're probably dealing with this all the time. Dubas especially is probably getting messages all the time, like horrible, just vile things, okay? But come on, man. Look at the situation you're in. You're the GM of the Leafs. You have everything at your fingertips. And then to come out publicly and say that you're not fully committed, in Brendan Shanahan's point of view, like I would feel the same way. So first of all, you're not fully committed. You've now told Shanahan privately. You've told the media. You've told the public this. And then you're coming back to Shanahan after a deal was already in place, essentially, a framework, whether that's $4 million a year, $5 million a year. Then you're coming to Shanahan with more money, You're coming to him with, as Elliot Friedman reported, you wanted more autonomy and not necessarily, he didn't want to kick Shanahan out of the decision-making process. He didn't want to remove him, but he wanted to streamline it because clearly there's a lot of barriers you need to go through. And who knows, maybe that was to make like big trades. I don't know if he had to go through the same process to sign Michael Bunting or Andre Kasha or name anyone from the past, right? But, Elliot Friedman essentially said that it went from Dubas to Shanahan to the board, and then would have to go back down. And I don't think there's other organizations that work in the same way. I mean, maybe there are, maybe the big organizations do the same thing, but that was a big sticking point in the negotiations as well. So he wanted more autonomy. He wanted more money. He wasn't sure that he wanted to be here. And from Shanahan's perspective, he's like, listen, even though I wanted this to happen, a deal was in place. How the fuck can I continue with this guy as GM if he's not committed to this job? So that's the way I look at it. I would have loved for him to stay, but I don't blame Shanahan making the decision that he did.
Yeah. To the point you made about the ladder of authority or the ladder of decision-making and how it trickled up and down. What I don't understand is, again, just making the assumption that everything we're hearing is accurate. That's a major talking point. That's a huge talking point. If that never came up during the last year of negotiation, now 2 days before this, 2 days before you, or 2 days after you get your first contract, you just throw that out. What? It's confusing, man. And to the point you made about it being a privilege, I would say that about a lot of franchises. If it was any Canadian market, the Montreal Canadiens, the Detroit Red Wings, New York Rangers, Boston Bruins, it's a privilege. So now we're getting a little outside the box, but Brendan Shanahan went up there. Okay. I always say the Toronto Maple Leafs are a corporation. They run very robotically. Everything is calculated. Okay. And what I'm getting at is, in my opinion, every single word that came out of Brendan Shanahan's mouth had a purpose. There was a goal with it. And as soon as the Leafs lost, like, we're all emotional, this and that. But you had this situation where Matthews and Nylander, there's questions up in the air with regards to their next contracts. We're a year away from that same issue with Marner and Tavares. I saw it as an opportunity. To look these guys in the face and say, look, do you want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs? They'd all nod. And then I would say, that's great. Do you want to win with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Because it's a different question. Okay? Because, and I'm not saying, oh, you got to take this huge haircut to be here, but you have to be reasonable, because you can say, I want 15 million, but then you can't in the same breath tell me you want to win. So in what Shanahan did, I think that's trying to change the culture of the organization.
That's a fair point.
If you could be the biggest Leaf homer in the world, at the end of the day, our culture, like, I'm not going to say it sucks, but if we had to point to a reason for the lack of playoff success, I'd point to culture. We're too soft. And by that, I mean, we don't go in the corners. I just mean, it's too much of a fantasy land. It's too easy. I mentioned I think it was a few weeks ago, I said it's become too cool to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. The commercials, the social media, like all the endorsements, like, no. It's got to be, there has to be that little bit of anxiousness.
Yeah, you have to be uncomfortable a little bit to be able to grow, right?
A little bit of anxiety is a good thing. Any person who's high up in a corporation will tell you that. So I think he had that purpose while he was up there. He's like, I'm not only talking in regards to Kyle, I'm talking at everybody involved here. That if you want to be a part of this, you want to be a part of this. But if you don't, you don't. And like you said, Bruno, you used the right word, privilege. It's a privilege to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we have to treat it that way. If you have any doubts or any questions, or you don't want to be a part of the right culture, sorry, man. Sorry. Like, I'm to the point now where I think this happens in age, right? And people comment down below what you think about this. As I previously mentioned, there's that divide with Shanahan and Dubas. And I feel like in social media, where, I mean, it's everything now, you're seeing side Dubas more. And what I attribute that to is age. It's age. It's, I'll say call them kids in their 20 somethings who haven't really experienced much other than Dubas, really and truly. And they're attached to him. And that's okay. They like their players. I just said it's very cool to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They like the group. They like the gang. There's been a lot of positive momentum for this organization in their lifetime. But as you get older and you lose players, guys walk away. I mean, talk to the older Leafs fans. What happened with Sittler and Keon and Lanny McDonald? And then going forward, I mean, we lost the whole thing that was absolutely terrible, but Sundin leaving, you get to a point where you lose attachment to players and you gain a better perspective on what's important. And that is the organization. The players come and go, coaches come and go, GMs come and go. So I think that's why the younger generation is taking that side from what I'm seeing anyway. And again, comment down below if you disagree with me. People might think I'm totally full of shit, but I think I'm at that point now in my life where I've been a Leafs fan for a long time. I've seen a revolving door of a lot of garbage. So I'm not going to have this attachment to a GM if I think he fucked up. And I think he fucked up. And my question now is, so you mentioned the meeting, Bruno, the meeting on Wednesday. So Kyle Dubas thought he was going to be the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, like, I mean, I can't imagine you're conducting a meeting with the coaching staff and executives in the organization and thinking that you're not going to be back and you're not going to resign and be there for the next whatever would have been 5 years.
So what is Kyle Dubas really and truly feeling right now? Maybe it's the discussions come out, but I haven't really heard much about that. And I don't mean this in the literal sense, but is he sitting in a dark room crying because he made a big mistake?
I think he's shocked, man.
I think he is too, man.
I think, he thinks about all of the money that MLSE, Rogers and Bell has, how they write blank checks. They wanted Mike Babcock. They give him $50 million. They pay players to not play for them. They pay players to go to Robidaw Island. You guys know how it is being Leaf fans. So I think Kyle Dubas thought that he was going to get that same sort of treatment where it's like, all right, Shanahan wants me back. I've now made the decision that I'm comfortable with the whole family situation. I want to be back. You know what? I'm going to ask for a little bit more money here because this is the Toronto Maple Leafs and they're just going to give it to me. Just like I gave a little extra money to Marner, a little extra money to Matthews potentially. They're going to do the same for me. And that just simply wasn't the case. But again, I think the biggest issue was that seed of doubt. It wasn't even, and Shanahan even said, like, he was asked point blank by Chris Johnston, like, did this come down to money? And Shanahan, maybe he's not going to be 100% truthful, but he's like, no, I would not characterize it like that at all. Like, It was that seed of doubt where this guy is not only telling me privately, he's telling the public that he's not sure he's all in. Like, so as much as we all like Dubas, like, again, I like Dubas. I thought he was a great GM. He's been the best GM this team has had for the last 20 years, going back to Pat Quinn. And I wanted him to be back. I wish he was still the general manager, but I'm sorry, man. If you're not all in and you're showing cracks in the armor, it's tough to get behind that and still support him and honestly feel sorry for him. Like Lepore, I think he's devastated right now. And again, we still need to hear from him.
Yeah.
Like at some point, I'm sure he's going to reach out to, one of the big name reporters in the industry and he's going to tell his side of the story. But I would imagine that he's probably pretty devastated at this point.
Yeah. I mean, we touched on the assets the Toronto Maple Leafs have. Kyle Dubas is a smart guy. He knows about this. If he goes to another team, or he had to know the entire time he was in Toronto, other teams can't just take on salary. Other teams can't just bury contracts. Other teams, I mean, if you wanted to buy someone out, if it made sense, your organization would do it. A huge contract. He knows that. If he goes even to, I'll say, an average franchise based on popularity, no, they don't do that. You made the problem.
Not even close.
Yeah, you fix it. And the awareness, and I'll say this too, right? So there is a gap in the NHL when it comes to franchises, whether we would like to admit it or not. And that's not to say that there's not a gap in the other major leagues, but like I'll use the NFL as an example. If you play for a bottom 10 brand NFL franchise, okay, the way you're treated compared to the upper echelon franchises, I bet is not that different, because they're all worth billions of dollars and they all like just shit money and they have their TV contracts. So in that point, I don't think it really matters. But in hockey, there's differences. There's a lot of differences. It came out a couple years ago that the Buffalo Sabres did not have a single scout in Finland. It's come out. One thing I've heard about the Leafs compared to other organizations is the travel of the staff. Certain organizations, say it's like the goalie coach or the power play coach, they don't come on the road. They stay at home.
Because listen to like Ryan O'Reilly and Nola Chari when they join the team, or any new player who joins the Leafs, they all rave about how well the organization treats them. Like that's all the new players rave about is like, oh my God, I can't believe how well I'm treated here. Like compared to other places that I've been.
Well, there's always been that rumor that the Leafs have a daycare for the players' kids, and it's believable. Like with all the other shit we pull, it's totally believable. So he knows about all this, all of it. So here he was in his 30s, in his
key to
30s.
The castle.
It's the joke. The joke I've always made about Kyle Dubas is, man, this guy makes me feel bad about myself, because here I am at my age and I ain't the general manager of the Toronto Fucking Maple Leafs, right? So he had awareness of that he's a smart guy, and if I had to bet, I hate getting inside people's heads. I hate getting inside people's emotions or making assumptions, but I think he's pretty disappointed right now. I think he's pretty disappointed.
Yeah, I think he's devastated. And the reason this whole situation sucks is because it's such an important time for the franchise. Matthews obviously needs an extension. He's eligible to sign on July 1st, and another bombshell that dropped on Hockey Night in Canada. And this has not been getting nearly enough coverage, in my opinion. Elliot Friedman, again, he talked yesterday with Ron McLean in the intermission of Panthers and Hurricanes. And he talked about how Dubas held that meeting on Wednesday with the team, and then how he wanted more autonomy and wanted to streamline the decision-making process, and how that was a part of his new contract. But he also mentioned that it's now unlikely that Austin Matthews signs on July 1st. Yeah. And again, maybe that's a situation where he wants to wait it out and get a feel for the new general manager. And at this point, it seems like Sheldon Keefe is going to get fired.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be shocked at this point if the new GM comes in and doesn't fire Sheldon Keefe, because you see it in all sports. It's not just hockey. When a new guy comes in, especially when it's a general manager, they always want to hire their coach. Like, it's just as simple as that. So it's just it's a difficult time right now to make this decision. And listen, Shanahan's a smart guy. Like, you think he's not aware of like all of 100%. The major decisions that need to be made?
100%.
So there must have been like a big seed of doubt in his head. And he must have felt so uncomfortable to the point that, like, even though all of these decisions need to be made on the roster, on the coaching staff, even the draft for that matter, free agency, with all of that hanging in the balance, he still said, you know what? This guy, based on our conversations, and who knows, maybe it even dated back earlier in the season to last year. Like, there's been rumors that Shanahan and Dubas have kind of had a little bit of a rocky relationship. Shanahan must have felt, and listen, I trust him. Like, he's a smart guy. He must have felt, you know what? This is not going to work. This is not the right guy for the job. Again, maybe this is going to blow up in the Leafs' faces. Maybe they're going to hire some, like recycled GM who's terrible at their jobs and is going to sewer the organization. And I hope that doesn't happen. But I think right now I'm going to give Shanahan, honestly, the benefit of the doubt based on how this all went down. And I would love to hear from Kyle Dubas, but the big thing now is like getting Matthews on board, because if Matthews is not on board with the future of this organization, then Lepore, you basically have to blow up the team. Like, I'm sorry, if you're trading Matthews at that point, like anything's on the table, and you're not going to be nearly as good as you were the last, whatever, call it 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons. And you're going to have to blow up the franchise. Honestly, if Matthews comes to the organization and says, I am not signing an extension, I'm playing out the final year of my contract, he needs to be traded. It's as simple
100%,
as that.
100%. And like, to the point about trusting Shanahan and the Matthews situation with this, I don't think much of it in the way of influence as to whether or not he re-signs with the team, because who's going to be talking to him? Let's say a GM's not hired in time or this process plays out. Shanahan's talking to him. Okay. So Austin, do you want to play for us? Yeah, but I'm not sure about the next GM, so I'm going to wait it out. Well, Austin, it is my responsibility to pick the GM. So you have to have the trust in me. Do you have the trust in me to guide the ship properly? If he hesitates, well, then you're getting traded, Austin. That's it.
Yeah.
So like, that's why I don't think it really affects anything, because if Austin Matthews was like so tied to Kyle Dubas that it was like the main factor in him re-signing in Toronto, I don't want him.
Yeah,
Get
that
out
would
of
be
here.
ridiculous.
That'd be
That's
ridiculous.
The main reason he wants to be here because of his relationship with Kyle Dubas. Like that can't be the reason you want to be here.
He should talk to some of the vets who've played for other organizations, gone back and forth with good organizations, bad organizations. You go through coaches, you go through GMs. It's part of it. You have to think about yourself and what's best for you and the organization you want to play for. If you have this big thing of, I'm not quite sure who the general manager is going to be, while at the same time, if the president was also let go, then I might be like, yeah, I don't blame the kid. But Shanahan's there. Yeah, and if you don't trust the president, well, then you have to be traded. As for whether or not you blow up the team, if Matthews is traded or doesn't want to re-sign, I mean, blow up. I mean, we can debate.
Blow up is a little aggressive, but there's got to be like a pretty significant retooling at that point.
Yeah. Well, right off the bat, Bruno, we have 11.65 million of cap space, right? So just on that, it's like, well, if we can get an $8 million forward and a $4 million defenseman, are we worse? Are we better? Debate that all day long, but it'll be a shakeup, that's for sure. I mean, I just think it more in the way of, I mean, any team, if a team lost a $5.5 million player and a $6 million player in the same summer, that's a different team now. That's a shakeup. So no one would deny that, but it would be interesting to see how everything would fall after that. Really and truly.
Because, well, just to be clear, Lepore, like I hope Austin Matthews is back.
Oh,
like,
me too.
This team needs its number one center, 60-goal scorer, Hart Trophy winner. Like, it would be a disaster if he didn't resign, just to make it 100% clear with everybody.
You know what, though, man? And again, back to my lack of closeness to players and coaches and GMs at this point in my life. Disaster. I don't know if it's a disaster. I really don't. Like, I've made the point for years that it's a cap league. Okay. We should no longer rank players based on ability. We should rank players based on value. Okay. And I'll go this route. Seattle had a great season in their second year. Okay. Very close to a conference finals berth. Vegas, they've been around 6 years. They've been to four conference finals. And last year was one of the ones they missed out on, and they were devastated by injuries. Okay. And people look at it and they're like, how do they do it? How do these teams do it? By that, I mean the expansion draft. How do they build this kind of team? Because it's not, you look at who you can protect. You protect the forwards, the defensemen, but you still have a lot of players left. Okay. Well, if you really think about it, if you're allowed to pick off 31 excellent value players, you very well might have a good team, because it's about total value. And what I'm getting with this is the debate of having two $4 million forwards and a $4 million defenseman. Does that make you better than Austin Matthews? So
yeah, like, do you go with the stars and scrubs approach like the Leafs do, and even like Colorado's moved into that now? Even Tampa, honestly, kind of has a similar structure. Or do you go with more of a value mindset across the board where everyone makes 5-6 million? There's a couple guys who are making 9 million.
Yeah.
And does that put you in a better position to win than going with the stars and scrubs approach?
Yeah, I think you do need the combination, because it's the best players, in my opinion, that are going to win at the end of the day. But what I was going to say was, again, like, so we have Nylander and Matthews set to be free agents a year from now. Right off if you ask the Leaf fan, let's say they both walked. They both just got up and walked, are we fucked? They'd say, oh my God, we're totally fucked. Losing two guys like that, we're going to take a huge step back. And that might be the case. But there's the other side of, well, now we have $20 million of cap space. $20 million is a lot, So I'm not going to say that Matthews and Nylander are bad value. I just think sometimes we overvalue the player themselves now rather than his actual percentage of the cap and what he brings. And we just kind of set aside the idea that we now live in a league where there's different ways to do it, because you can do it anyway. Like let's say you can do it with the stars at the top, you can do it with a balanced lineup, but it's about the total value. So people can say, oh, if we lose Austin Matthews, we're screwed. Well, if he wants to sign for $14 million, are we getting the value? Even if he scores 60 goals? It's that's the discussion to me. So as for my fears in whatever happens, I'm kind of completely removed from that with whatever we lose, because the trust would have to go to Shanahan and the new GM to fill it properly. And that's what it comes down to. I'll make the assessment when the cap space is filled with I see what we get in return and how the cap space is filled. I'll put it that way.
And speaking of value and how this team is structured, how do you feel about Kyle Dubas' tenure? Because let's go through a couple of the major things, both positive and negative, that were attributed to him. And I have a list here. So, Lepore, when I think of, let's start with the best moves that he made as GM, okay? When I think of the best moves that Kyle Dubas has made, the first one that comes to mind, especially from a draft perspective, and we just found this out over the last 2 or 3 weeks, was drafting Matthew Nyes in the second round. Like, that seems like an absolute slam dunk based on how that guy played in the playoffs. So that's number one. He acquired Ryan O'Reilly and Nola Chari at the deadline for 3 draft picks. That was also a big move, probably his best trade deadline acquisition. I would even lump Luke Shen into that, even though Luke Shen was traded for a 3rd-round pick. I thought he was phenomenal in the playoffs. Go down the list. He signed Ilya Samsonov to a 1-year deal, who had a great season, ended up being the Leafs' #1 goalie, 1 year, I believe $1.8 million. I'm going to even lump this in, and I know a lot of people would probably have pushback on this, but signing trading for Jake Muzzin, I actually thought was a win. And I know the Leafs lost Sean Durzi, who's a good player, and they gave up a 1st-round pick. I just really think the injuries derailed Muzzin, but I thought he was like the perfect defenseman that they needed at the time. Offense, grit, physicality. He brought it all when he was fully healthy, okay? He signed Michael Bunting. He signed TJ Brody. Like, he did really good work in terms of fixing the decor and making this, the Leafs for the longest time, a decade plus, were horrible defensively. But under Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe, defensively, the Leafs were good. And this past season, they arguably had their best defensive season of like the last 20 years, based on the stats. Go down the list. He brought in Ilya Mikheyev from the KHL, who was a nice player. Signing Jason Spezza for $750K. Some other draft picks: Rasmus Sandin, Rodion Amirov, and Nick Robertson. So those are kind of the good things that I look at when I think of Dubas. And again, people will look at, he inherited Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander. But Lepore, we've talked about this on previous shows. Teams go years searching for players like that. Dubas did not have to search for any of those guys. He obviously brought in Tavares. And again, I think that's, if you want to look back at the worst moves that he's made, and I can mention those briefly here. Number one, protecting Justin Hall in the Seattle expansion draft and letting Jared McCann go to the Kraken and score 40 goals this past season. That was a mistake. He traded Nazem Kadri to Colorado for Tyson Barrie and Alex Kerfoot. There were some other draft picks, and Callie Rosen was involved in that deal as well. We can call that a loss. He traded a 1st and a 4th-round pick to Columbus for Nick Foligno. He signed Peter Mrazek to a 3-year, $11.4 million contract. And then the big mistake, you could say, and again, I don't even want to really characterize this as a mistake, was signing the Tavares contract. Because at the time, you're getting an elite 28-year-old center who wants to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who is getting offers of like $13 million from the Sharks, And he figured, all right, the contract is obviously not going to age well, but in the first 3 to 4 years, I'm hoping we can make a run to the cup. And that obviously never happened. And now that's the huge anchor. When you look at the cap sheet of the Leafs, that Tavares contract sucks. And it's unfortunate it happened that way. But I think looking at all the decisions he made throughout his tenure, I don't want to say he was a phenomenal GM by any means. Like, he wasn't this wizard who did things that no one else in hockey could have done. But I think for the most part, honestly, I think he did a really good job. Another thing I'll mention, Lepore, since he became GM, the Leafs had the 5th best record in the NHL under his tenure over the last 5 years. Only the Lightning, Bruins, Avalanche, and Hurricanes had a better regular season record. I'll specify, better regular season record than the Leafs during his time as GM.
Yeah, one thing Dubas, and I was talking about value, one thing Dubas was excellent at was finding value at the bottom of the lineup. And he made Toronto a desirable location, like the Spetzas, the Giordanos, Brody's, the older guys wanting to come. But if we're going to judge it, I said before, this is a competitive environment, okay? And I'm not going to be the guy who says, oh, he inherited like this unbelievable team. But what he did have was one of the greatest goal scorers this league's ever seen. And people are rolling their eyes, but that's the truth if you look at the pace. A winger who's nominated for the Selke in Mitch Marner, an amazing forward in William Nylander, a second-team All-Star in Morgan Riley. And yeah, he brought in Tavares. So he had that. He did have that. And again, I'm not saying he inherited all of it and it was easy, but he had that. If we were sitting outside the box, and even you remove names, but you just list those descriptions I just put out, and someone said to you, in 6 playoff attempts, the best they ever did was win 5 games. That's it.
I mean, the results are the results at that point.
Exactly.
It's not good.
Like I said, it's a competitive environment. You have to judge someone based on results, and the results weren't there, right? And that's, I always would have said I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in these discussions for Dubas, because you're picturing him pleading his case to Shanahan or the board. But when Shanahan or the board says, yeah, but you keep losing in the playoffs and putting up duds, what was Kyle saying? And you maybe saying, oh, it was bad luck, or this happened, injuries, or who knows? I mean, multiple things can be true. You can fuck up, or you can do a good job and lose. People have heard me say that a million times. But if someone said to me at the start of the Kyle Dubas tenure that this team, their best playoff run would be 5 wins, I'd be like, he's no longer GM. I would make the assumption that he was let go.
Yeah, it's tough. Honestly, it's tough to look at the results and say that he did a phenomenal job. Listen, again, I think he's been the best GM this team has had in 20 years. And even going back to the contracts, okay? Again, like, I don't want to characterize the Tavares signing as this massive mistake. I felt like the players let Dubas down more than Dubas let the organization down. Like, that's where I stand.
Me too.
And even like the contracts, like, I don't think he overpaid Austin Matthews. I think the mistake, I guess, with Matthews is that he didn't lock him up for 8 years.
Yeah.
That would have been ideal. The same thing with Marner and even Nylander for that matter. I think if you want to look at any of the big 3, right, not including Tavares, the only guy he really overpaid was Marner. And what did he overpay him by? $1.75 million. Like, would you have liked him to get a contract like Mikko Rantanen got, 9 and change? Like, that would have been ideal. Like, I think he overpaid Marner. That's the one guy I would say that he kind of screwed up. And it wasn't even that big of a screw up. Like, the guy's a 2-time first-team All-Star, nominated for the Selke. Like, Marner's a phenomenal player. And say what you want about what he's done in the playoffs. Like, it's not like he's egregiously overpaid by any means. But again, it wasn't an 8-year deal. Matthews wasn't an 8-year deal. I think that the players let him down more than he let the organization down. And I like what Dubas did around the periphery. I like how he rebuilt the defense core. I liked some of the draft picks that he made. A lot of the times, the Leafs didn't have high draft picks. So we can't even say like, oh, what was his hit rate in the draft? Because he was never drafting in the top 10 or the top 15. And when he did, and he picked Rodion Amirov, the guy is now dealing with brain cancer, which is completely tragic in itself. And we're obviously wishing the best for him and his future. So it's like, there was honestly a lot of bad luck in terms of having the core that the Leafs had and only winning one playoff series in the last 7 years. So, I mean, for the most part, again, I'm going to say it, like, I think Kyle Dubas did a good job, and I think it was more the players letting him down.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. But how I'll just sum it up is this way. No one can look me in the face and said he did an amazing job. Well, no, because an amazing job would entail winning more than a single round. So I think it's wrong to say that he did a terrible job because of the lack of playoff success, but no one's going to say he did an amazing job. So usually when a GM doesn't continue with a team, it's pretty straightforward when it comes to how people describe the tenure. But in the case of Dubas, there is some discussion and some debate as to how good of a GM he was. And you made the list, man. A lot of good deals, a lot of bad ones. And you forgot about Matt Murray.
Matt Murray, that was bad.
In your list of trades. So we're Leafs fans. So we'll be talking about it for the next 30, 40 years, like the Dubas tenure. And I'm sure books will be written, but they didn't win. He didn't win. So it's funny because how many times, and this is why this conversation is so fascinating, because we've both acknowledged on this show that we are disappointed in this. We wanted Dubas to continue, but at the same time, we understand it. And I guess that's logic versus emotion, and that's part of being a fan. But I'll say it, here I am like, man, this sucks. I'm sad. But then I'm like, wait a second, we haven't won a round in 6 years, and he lost a bunch of contract negotiations, and he made some bad trades. So I think, to me, I feel good about it. I feel free about it simply because he wasn't 100% committed. The fact that it is a debate as to the type of job he did, and then he stood on a mic in front of the entire country and said that he may not take the job, well, then I'm okay. I am more than okay with this.
Yeah, like, I don't think this is a disastrous situation by any means. Like, I think the new GM can come in, and as long as this new GM is smart, I hope the new GM is smart and knows what the hell they're doing. Like, I don't think it's a situation that cannot be fixed and handled by someone who knows what they're doing. So that leads us into our last conversation on this show. Who the hell is going to be the next GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs? Because the main name that we are hearing being floated around, and you could even look at, some of the sports books, and there's already odds up on this. Eric Tulsky, the current assistant general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes, who are currently down 0-2 in the Eastern Conference Final to the Panthers, seems to be one of the favorites. This guy went to Harvard. He's a genius. He helped develop their analytics and scouting department, and he's done a lot of great work since he joined the Hurricanes 8 years ago, and now he's in his second year as assistant GM. But the big thing that Shanahan mentioned in his press conference is that experience will be a very attractive quality. So it seems like Brendan Shanahan wants to hire a general manager who we all know, who's worked in the NHL for a number of years, and that has a lot of people scared, because you think of names like Jim Benning and Peter Chiarelli and Brad Treliving, who's clearly looking for a new job after he parted ways with the Flames. And people are a little bit uneasy about this, because you could go the route of bringing in the next Dubas, Eric Tulsky. It's like a souped up version, if you want to call it, of Kyle Dubas. I guess he's got maybe a little more experience than Dubas. I mean, not really. It's kind of like hiring the same guy. That's why I don't feel like a guy like that's going to come in, even though Shanahan said, I'm going to keep an open mind. I want to, go through the process thoroughly and make the best decision here. But it does seem like he's going to hire a name that we all know. And who do you think that's going to be, Lepore? Because at this point, it seems like, to me, Brad Treliving is the front runner. And I don't hate Brad Treliving. Like, I honestly thought he did a pretty solid job with the Calgary Flames, and Lepore's about to snap at me for saying that. It seems like he's the front runner. I'm not sure, though. I don't know what their process is to hire this new guy, but it looks like it's going to be someone with experience.
I think I'm going to try to say this without sounding egotistical as a Leaf fan. I think that's too easy. I think that list of names you brought forward, and like, these are the betting favorites because the NHL is just a merry-go-round of guys doing different jobs. I think that's too easy for Shanahan and the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think it will be something a little more calculated and smart. What I will say is this: I've said it for about a year that I thought the next general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, whether it was Kyle Dubas leaving this summer or in 3 years or in 5 years, unless they were offered another job, was going to be Haley Wickenheiser.
Wow,
I thought the Leafs were going to be the first NHL team to have a female as general manager. And I think Wickenheiser, she's got the right temperament. She has experience. She's an academic. She's a doctor, for crying out loud. She's seen it all. I think she's the type of person that can look someone in the eyes and talk straightforward to them. So that was always my assumption, that Wickenheiser would be the next GM. But I honestly think it's one of those things where it's going to be somebody who no one's talking about. But then when it happens, it'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. That's not surprising. And I can't even think of a name right now of people who would fall into that category. But there's just something in me that thinks that it's not going to be something just straightforward and obvious like Chiarelli, just because he was a GM. No, it's going to be something a little more creative, and that might be a good thing. That might be a bad thing. People can debate all this. And I made the point about egotistical. I'm trying to make the point that, like, I almost think Shanahan's too smart for that. Like, I'm giving him credit. As I said before, I give credit to smart people. So I don't have a guess at this point. I mean, maybe he just gets on the mic and says, hey, everyone, I decided I'm going to be GM. That'd be pretty cool.
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible. Yeah, like when I look at Brad Treliving, it just seems too obvious. It just seems way too obvious. He just parted ways with the Flames. You know, he made some big time moves to try to save that franchise when Gaudreau left in free agency. Kachuk wanted out. And I honestly like the aggressive moves that Treliving made. I think he built a nice team in Calgary. I think that team was kind of sewered in a way by Daryl Sutter and the way that they played. But it just seems a little too obvious. I agree. I think this is going to be maybe a little bit longer of a process than people think. Like, even though Shanahan said that, listen, I need a new GM ASAP. We got to make all these decisions. The draft is coming up, free agency. Like, there has to be a GM in place sooner rather than later. Wickenheiser's very interesting, man. You said it, like, been around hockey forever. I mean, obviously, like a Hall of Fame player, a doctor. Like, yeah. I mean, Haley Wickenheiser has everything you would want.
Again, like, speaking of people who make you feel bad about yourself, right?
For real, man. But no, I mean, Eric Tulsky, as I mentioned, like, there's names are floating, or even like Doug Armstrong, who's currently with the Blues. Like, his name's been floated around that he might potentially have an out in his contract.
Yeah.
I've even heard Scott Mellenby, who I believe, I want to say, according to Darren Dreger, I think he was talking about this from TSN, and he was saying how, like, Scott Mellenby's been in like 10 different interviews and has been like the runner-up like numerous times in multiple GM searches across the league, and he apparently is like dying for an opportunity. That's another name that comes to mind, but who knows, man? Like, it's so hard to say when it comes to this type of stuff. Like, it's like you said, like, a guy could completely come out of the woodwork that we're not expecting. But before it's that time of the show, is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we wrap up this podcast?
I'll just finish with this, and this might be kind of boring on the topic of the next GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Shanahan was willing to extend Dubas. Okay. So with that, it's safe to say that he liked his style. He liked the type of GM he was. He liked how he conducted business. So to that point, I've wondered if just promoting Brandon Brenham would be the way to go, because you're getting Kyle Dubas light. He's the cap guy. He's the numbers guy. You're essentially going to run the ship the same way. And with the influence of himself and Haley Wickenheiser, might not be a bad thing. I mean, maybe Wickenheiser takes a bigger role on the mic and stuff like that. Then you bring in some other executive. But it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be fun. It may feel for Leafs fans that the sky is falling, but we're Leafs fans. The sky's always falling. We're battle tested. We've been through the gutter. It sucks being a Leafs fan. So bring it on. It's going to be exciting all around, whether it's drama, new players, us being happy with a certain GM or coach, disappointed. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And as fans, I mean, you're relevant. We're relevant. So don't be afraid when everyone's talking bad about you. Be afraid when no one's saying anything about you. And the Leafs are going to be very relevant this summer. So there's going to be a lot of content, and it's going to be a blast, Bruno. And people could say I'm, kind of hiding behind something right now, but I really and truly feel that way.
Just please hire a general manager that we can all get excited about.
Oh, fuck.
Please don't hire a GM, like a recycled GM who has scarred Canadian hockey fans in the past. Not even Canadian hockey fans, all hockey fans for that matter. Like, please don't go and hire like Peter Chiarelli. Like, I know Peter Chiarelli's smart, and I mean, I believe he was a lawyer, and like, I mean, I know he's worked in the league for a long time, but it's like, please don't go out and make a decision like that. Hire someone fresh, clever, who does have experience, but someone that we could all get excited about and get behind, and someone who knows what the hell they're doing. I think that's all we're asking for at this point.
Anthony Bruno, maybe bring your name in the hat.
I'm putting my name in the hat, Brendan.
Package deal though, right? The two GFP guys running the team.
Send us an email. You can find it on our YouTube page, Mr. Shanahan. Anthony Bruno, Michael Lepore, throwing our hat in the ring to be co-GMs of the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I'm sure all the players would love it after all the shit we threw out to them after the playoff loss.
Oh man, Leafs Nation would burn down if two guys with a podcast became
two guys from a podcast. It's a movie.
Oh my goodness. All right. That is going to do it for episode 105 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. If you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, we would really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this show, give us a 5-star rating and review on either Apple or Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube and you enjoyed the content, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not yet subscribed, ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is posting some new content. And please leave a comment down below and give us your thoughts on how you think the Dubas versus Shanahan situation played out, who you want to see as the next GM. We would love to hear from you. But that is going to do it, everybody. For Michael Lepore, I'm Anthony Bruno. There's going to be a lot of news that comes down the pipeline in Leafs Nation, and we will be here ready to discuss it. But until then, enjoy your long weekend.
Yes.
Have a good one, and we will talk soon.
Go Leafs, go. Thanks, everyone.